Good afternoon or good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks again for joining us. Cloud Connection Summit 2020. This is our tech session. Today, I'm very proud to be with a dais of beautiful and intelligent and bright and thought-provoking people. Before we get started, though, I'm actually going to call one of those people to get before we get started. Mr. Peter Ayud, or how you doing, as he introduce himself, CEO of TrueGrid. Peter, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
Thank you, Ray, and thanks everyone for joining. Peter Ayud, I'm the co-founder and CEO of TrueGrid, and TrueGrid is a sponsor of this event. We specialize in creating technologies that empower MSPs to provide secure and safe remote work solutions, where the hallmark of our product is simplicity and all the security that you need. So thank you.
Yeah, and I thought he would be an excellent person to be on this zero trust session. You know, we're talking about enforcing zero trust security, but at the same time, we're balancing work from home. So who better to speak on the subject than a vendor that makes that possible? And for what it's worth, I did spend time with him vetting the product because I wanted to make sure somebody that, you know, had an idea what they're doing. And he's definitely got the answers here, which I love. We have some other people here on our panel today. Talking about rock stars, we will introduce Mr. Luis Giraldo, who's also one of the three-letter names, right? Not just OIT, but three-letter domain names. Mr. Luis Giraldo of OOC. How you doing, Luis?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I feel lucky to be in company of these very smart and talented people, and so hoping I can learn something today. Really.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to learn from each one of you. So, and I've heard enough of your speeches and presentations that, you know, I know you're going to have a lot to add. And also, this man should need no introduction. He's been participating all week and somehow still managed to post blogs on CyberDrain at the same time, which is truly impressive, while making a PowerShell module for our platform. You know, it should go without saying, but Mr. Kelvin, let's see if I can do this. Tehelar, is that even close?
Not at all.
Of Live Networks. How you doing, Kelvin?
Good. Thanks for having me, man. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is, you know, I see you guys are going all over the place. I see a lot of our partners, Clay, Kent, you know, Simon, Alex, you know, Melissa. I see you guys in there, and I want to promote interactivity. This is not going to be a talking head session. All right. Each one of these people in this session are big on community and big on interactivity and partnership. I want to see you guys talking. If you want to come up on video, we'll have you too. But let's get started. I want to go to Peter first. Peter, what is zero trust? We hear that a lot, but let's define it so we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. In its simplest form, the concept of zero trust, let me kind of give you background about where it started first. In 2009, there was a state-sponsored operation from China called Operation Aurora that targeted over 40 companies in the US, and Google being one of them. And the attacks were successful. And shortly after, Google decided that the best way they could protect themselves is to assume that all of their internal systems are public. So if you assume the internal systems are public, then they can be hacked, then the way you're going to secure them is going to be even different. So that was kind of started the popularization of the zero trust concept. And the simple concept of it is that every company should assume that any user, any device, regardless of where they are, even on the internal company network or remote, cannot be trusted. So that means before you can give access to any internal resource, you could use segmentation. I think Calvin's going to talk about that. Or you could use even desktop vaulting, no firewall ports opened. You could validate all the users in the cloud before they can connect. And there are ways to do that. But the entire premise of zero trust is it doesn't matter who they are, whether they're employees using trusted device, you have to assume they cannot be trusted. And I think Microsoft is trying to do the same thing using the idea of conditional access, which we're going to talk about. But that's the concept behind zero trust.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? It's not, you know, as MSPs, we've been saying it forever, you know, the users are the most dangerous, most dangerous item on the network. And now the zero trust, which is not new, right? The zero trust model is just saying, let's enforce it. We're aware of it. Let's enforce it. Yeah. You know, Kelvin, I'll kick off to you since, you know, Peter mentioned you know, segmentation. But before we get to segmentation, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I do want to define what is segmentation. What is he talking about?
Well, Segmentation can be done in a lot of different ways, and the biggest way that we see is simple network segmentation, where people are saying, hey, I have separated LANs for all my devices. I have my phones there, I have my workstations there, I have my printers there, and all of those are in their own little worlds. Now, there's a big difference between just segmentation and how you implement zero trust, because with zero trust, you're also saying, I assume every device has been compromised already. So you're going to make sure that when a device is connected, it doesn't get a full reign of the network. It doesn't get access to every resource. It can jump from the segment where the VoIP phone is to the next segment where the workstations are. All of these things are blocked by default. And you start working with health policies and a lot of other complex stuff to actually start allowing devices more and more access as you confirm that they are who they say they are and that they are in the state that you want them to be in. So just saying zero trust is segmentation is not enough. Zero trust is a combination of a lot of different technical resources that you use to make sure that a workstation that is accessing resources actually should have access to those resources and nothing else on the network. So I guess that's the biggest part about where zero trust is leading you. It's leading you to a more secure environment where you constantly think from the workstation perspective.
So zero trust, so segmentation is closing all the doors, the doors in the house, and then zero trust is saying we're putting locks on both sides of that door, right? If you're in,
Exactly.
we're locking you in. If you're on the out, we're locking you out. Luis, you know, there's a lot of things that come up in security. There's a lot of, we get these news announcements. Garmin is still going on after a week and a half, which is crazy. We have these announcements of the DNS, right? The DNS flaw, the DNS flaw, the WatchGuard thing from the week before. But a lot of these times there's fear and there's practice, and there's a line between awareness and actually implementation, and we don't want to overwhelm the user, right? We don't want to say, okay, it's not just one boogeyman and there's a million boogeymen out there, but we need to communicate this. But before we even get into that, though, I want to ask, you heard Peter, you heard Kelvin, do we care about zero trust? Is this another one of those theory things, or this is something we really need to practice?
Yeah, I think obviously within the context of conversations between folks like us who understand the concept, understand what needs to be done, there's a big gap between that and speaking to a small business owner with the same terminology or with the same type of fear, if you will, because I'm not sure that they're ever going to understand sort of what the impact is to their business if they've never gone through a breach or kind of security incident of any kind. And the challenge also for MSPs, and we were chatting about this last week with Kelvin and Peter, is that many years ago, security was sort of this optional thing at the top of your stack. It's like, oh, by the way, would you like some security with your fries? And it was not the kind of thing that people sort of did by design or by instinct. And so as obviously the threats continue to evolve, we are becoming more cognizant of the need to do that by design. But there's also the shift that you need to do in practicality and reality with the customer base as well, and the added cost that comes with that, and actually being able to deploy all these things to those users. But what I find interesting is the idea that in Europe, I see this quite a bit, having been in SaaS for the last 8 years or so, is that the European MSPs tend to be much more cloud forward, for example, than the North American MSPs are. And I see a lot more cloud adoption there. And so there's sort of a faster adoption of some of this zero security model, because in North America, a lot of businesses still have sort of the traditional network behind a firewall. And so it's easy to just be complacent about that approach to zero trust. So yeah, that's sort of my just high level thought on that.
So, it's funny because you talk about the European markets being more cloud-centric, but at the same time, I heard not too long ago that hackers started in the Netherlands. So I didn't.
And that's maybe exactly why.
Yeah. So which is why Kelvin's on here. He's on here to dispel the rumor. No.
Yeah, exactly.
The good comes from it too, right? So so we have zero trust. We understand zero trust. We understand the need for zero trust. So is this one of those things, there's cost, there's complexity, there's, again, we're marrying practical and theory, right? So how do we implement zero trust? Segmentation is just a component. It's not the answer. And Peter, I know you have an answer for this, so I'm going to leave you last on this because I think you're going to have the most comprehensive one. But we'll kick it back to Kelvin. How do we, when they say this is too expensive to implement, when this is too hard, can you give us some real life examples of how you're implementing zero trust and how you address that?
Absolutely. So first, maybe we should refer to, we have some polls running. If you click on the button right there, I think you have a couple of polls, and you can say how you guys are handling zero trust, and if you already are. I'm just noting that because my conversation will probably tie into those. We've decided to implement zero trust with the resources that we currently have. We've always said two things. Number one, our technology stack is what matters, so we implement that at every client. The client doesn't get to say, I want this firewall, I want this, I want these switches, I want these phones. We're the experts. We decide what they run and what they do not run. We don't allow them to have any other hardware. It's as simple as that. And because of that extreme mode of standardization, we've been able to use a zero trust model using very simple equipment. For example, we use UBNT equipment, Unify, and we've just decided to standardize on that entire stack. The main reason people try to avoid zero trust models is because there's a lot of costs involved, there's a lot of risks involved. And the moment that you're saying like, okay, you know what, this is going to cost me so much extra, I don't want zero trust to affect my bottom line, but I want people to be secure. It's not true that it incurs costs directly. It might have some training costs. It might have some educational costs. You might have to invest in people instead of hardware. But we've always believed very hard in our people side, and that's why we've implemented with what we have. We're a Microsoft house, so we use Radius via Azure AD, all these kind of items to secure our environment. And we really start working from the workstation down or from the workstation up. We don't have a UTM because the supplier that we use doesn't supply UTMs, but we use stuff like 801.x, which is securing ports directly only for authenticated devices. These are all steps you can take without having a heavy UTM device or a heavy network device that is handling firewalling and malware scanning for you. You can simply say, okay, hey, we're forgetting about that layer because we're having a lot of different layers in place. That's also a part of the zero trust security model. You can't just say like, hey, I'm going to use one product and that is going to solve all my zero trust issues. You have to think of constant security hygiene.
Yeah, right, the portability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So, Luis, let me ask you, I'm seeing a lot of 35% of the people here that are answering the poll is saying the biggest barrier for better security is client concerns and client pushback. Kelvin touched on it. We need to implement these solutions that have low barrier to entry for the partner, for our clients, whether it's financially speaking, or even if you're an MSP, like the way we operate things, we include everything. We don't ask them to pay for extra stuff. If it's needed, we include it. That's part of our pricing model. But sometimes there's a barrier to entry as far as the learning curve, right, for the user, as far as getting them to adopt a new practice. How do you communicate that? How do you get them to adopt it? Because if they don't adopt it, the security is useless, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned the learning curve because it applies greatly on the MSP side as well, in the sense that we have to also learn how to productize this and how to articulate it and speak to the customer in terms of business risk and business risk mitigation. So I feel like a big part of the process is having an actual sort of strategy around the 1, 2, 3 stages that are required to sort of be able to implement the solution, technically speaking, have a stack that is your standard stack that you can approach, but also being able to discuss it in a way that the customer will understand the business outcomes, the business value, and the risk that's being mitigated. And then lastly, obviously, be able to show that you're able to keep that security in place across the portability, across the devices, across the changes of users, across the applications in the cloud, and all these different bits and pieces. I think nobody can argue with the idea that if it's just part of your stack and it's included, that's great. For most MSPs, however, that have come from either break fix or that have come from security plans or per user fees that maybe did not include these things in the past, it's a gradual process. It's really difficult to turn on this tap from one day to the next because you have a lot of cost that you have to eat in many cases in order to just deploy it to customers. So I think that's the biggest shift. I think that is people have to learn this internally just as much as externally.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And when we talk about internal, external, going back to that initial analogy I gave of, closing the doors in the house and, locking people inside and outside. Now, Peter, we're talking about not one house, right? We're talking about multiple houses. Now, it was hard enough to secure one location or a couple sites for a client. Now everybody's working from home since February or March, and we still have to employ the same practices. So I asked this loaded question. Any ideas how we do that?
Yes. First of all, let me acknowledge what Kelvin brought up and what Luis also brought up as well. Both are correct in the sense that if you're an MSP and it's part of your stack, you're actually doing your customers a favor by letting them enable and embrace technology the easiest way. But like Luis also pointed out, if you're coming from break fix, you're probably not there yet. I think as experts, it's MSP's jobs to educate our customers about how to protect themselves. After all, that's why they hired us, right? So that even if you're a break fix person and you're just coming into this, learn quickly as much as you can the way to kind of, I would say, defend and support your customers. And if zero trust is part of the solution, you have to be able to pitch it to them. As a matter of fact, it's actually better that you explain to them all their array of options and the different cost structures, tell them what's important. Like today, I don't imagine any MSP would tell a customer that because antivirus is expensive, don't embrace it. You have to have it, right? You're not even gonna like think twice about telling a customer they need a firewall, right? So at some point, because security is multi-layered, and if you truly want to be secure, you have to embrace the right technology that fits the customer. And if zero trust is part of the solution, it's the job of the MSP to sell it. As a matter of fact, if the customer says no, they don't want it, it might actually be to the MSP's advantage to actually, in a non-confrontational way, have the customer sign a waiver that I've done my bit to explain to you, you need these things, even though there's nothing I can do to guarantee you never be hacked. Our job is to make you a very hard target, for being hacked. So as a result, I think you should do this, and this is what it costs. If you don't do this, can you sign this waiver? That's going to one way MSP can actually achieve that. As far as whether zero trust is required, I think it is because one of the things that don't been addressed very well is the antivirus does something where the threat is already in your desktop. Then antivirus is trying to stop it, right? Zero trust is trying to say, before you even come near me at all, before you come near my network, like way where you are at home, I'm going to make sure you're who you say you are. I'll validate your authentication in the cloud. I'll validate your device in the cloud. If you don't meet the criteria that I set, you can't even see my network.
Super duper. Yeah, you guys need anything, give me a shout.
Good. So in that sense, zero trust is needed, right? So to kind of buttress what Kelvin said about the complexity, because there are many ways to implement it. So TrueGrid kind of took the approach that every MSP would determine how they achieve zero trust within a customer network. The question then becomes, just like you said, Ray, people are now working from home. How do you add that to it? So what TrueGrid says, look, let's simplify that process. So if an MSP is already implementing zero trust within the network, whether it's segmentation or vaulting or any which way they're doing, to now give the remote access piece to it, we want to simplify it. So we know that VPN is one of the easiest way to get breached. We've seen a lot of that in the past few months. So don't use VPN is my recommendation, because VPN actually extends your attack surface. So if you're dealing with trying to protect a network to begin with, we have your firewall, you're not letting anything in. The moment you add VPN to it, where you give a remote user VPN access, all of a sudden that remote user just extended your attack surface. So if you have to deal with 50 employees in that company, they're all doing VPN in, you have your network to protect, you now have 50 remote devices to protect as well. So you cut VPN. And so TrueGrid said, look, what if you've already defined and designed a very effective zero trust system internally, whether using VDI or the actual PCs of the user? How can we then safely authenticate you in the cloud, your device, and who you are before we let you in with all firewall ports closed? And that's what we bring to the table. We cannot simplify that last aspect of it, meaning that if you've already done the job of implementing zero trust internally, securely, then we want to give you an easy way to admit remote users, whether they're using unmanaged devices, their home PC, or company issue asset, no VPN. Let them come in a secure fashion to the desktop they already trust internally and continue their work as if they were actually in the office. So that's kind of the way we will explain how people should do this. One is be the expert, educate your customers. Let them sign a waiver if they want to adopt it. Encourage them to have insurance, cybersecurity insurance, for example. And finally, use a technology that simplifies the entire process for you. To that end, Ray, we actually released for this event, for people that can go back to our booth, a checklist for remote work. So we gave you a checklist of all the things you can go through if you're emerging MSP coming from break fix to be an MSP. We gave you a checklist you can go through and say, okay, for my customer, these are all the things I could do. Which ones actually apply to me? You can check those boxes and use that to implement your own methodology going forward.
And we normally do this thing where we share the files here in the chat. Because this is security focused, and I'm going to do something a little out of context. I want to kind of force you guys to go examine the security solutions. So we're not going to post the files in this session. I do want you to go talk to Peter and his team. Peter brought a lot of people here ready to talk to us. Go talk to them. Go get the checklist. Go see how to make it easy. Because like you said, if we don't make it easy, forget the cost. But if we don't make it easy for them, they're not going to do it. Who is it? Benjamin Franklin was quoted, or I forget if it was Benjamin Franklin was quoted. You can have security and convenience, or convenience. You can't have both. There are a few cases where you can, and this is one of them. So I'm reading the polls and I'm seeing, who's implementing zero trust, right? Are you already using a zero trust model? And I'm seeing the majority is no, but I'm planning to. If you're planning to, go talk to Peter. Or go adopt these things that we're talking here. I mean, talk about making it easy. So I'll go backwards here. Luis, you have your MSP, and I don't want to call you on the spot, but that's exactly what I'm doing. Are you implementing zero trust right now with your clients, and internally taking from Chris Blackman? Are you doing it with your own MSP as well?
Yeah, on our end, we're definitely quote unquote dog fooding our approach to zero trust, and I think it's unreasonable for us to expect anybody will do it if we don't know how to do it and adopt it and process the tasks required as an end user to adopt that. So we adopted an IDP. Everything requires a single sign-on and MFA. Where it's interesting that how this approach has sort of put us in a situation where we actually decline working with certain vendors if they don't have certain standards of security. And this is the kind of thing that I feel like you may give a little bit of room for wiggle if you don't set a standard for yourself. And so this is kind of our approach. Now with end customers, like I said before, and a lot of my comments have been basically talking from my experience of working with my own customers, is that it is a shift. It is a transition that takes time. Many customers have been, on this pricing model for a number of years. And yes, we could just go and do all this stuff, inconvenience the users for a couple of months while they figure it out and eat all the cost. But I feel like that would cause potentially more problems. I think one of the big challenges of zero trust is shadow IT. And we were having a conversation about this the other day, simply because if you don't implement or have a good strategy for this, people are just going to go around you and they're going to create a bigger problem as a result. And so I think the ability to be able to lock down the challenge of shadow ID in the process is a key part of it.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And, we keep having to find, and then remember, everybody, don't feel too bad. This is a constantly moving target, right?
It really is.
We're talking about things, and the reason there's such a long tail on this from when it's first announced to when it gets implemented is because what we perceive as, or what we're told as best practices changes, right? It wasn't that long ago RDP was a best practice, and then changing the port on 3389 was the best practice, and that just goes to show you, if Microsoft says the best practice, don't do it. So, but it is a moving target, but you have to stay aware of what's going on. You got to keep on top of the news. You got to use the right vendors. But I love what Luis just said, though. yes, teach your clients, dog food it, but qualify your vendors. For the love of God, qualify your vendors. Talk to them. How are they implementing zero trust? One of the things that makes me laugh is asking your vendor for a BA now has become commonplace. And how many vendors are being terrified at it, right? They're saying, we got to go talk to legal. There's nothing in HIPAA that's all that crazy. If you have a breach, if you have a leak of information, you disclose it within a reasonable timeline. You have somebody in charge of security. You're doing auditing and you have authentication and access. There's nothing that they shouldn't already be doing anyway. But now we're making them sign a legal document saying they are. I'm trying to get Jonathan Crow from Ninja RMM to come on. I believe they just, he's had me on enough times. So, I'm trying to get him to come on also.
Just invite him.
Ninja, I'm sorry? Just invite him?
Just invite him. Just invite him.
Yeah, don't even ask. Why not?
Don't even ask. Come on,
We'll see
man.
what happens. And then poor Jonathan, he always
while we're waiting,
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
While we're waiting for Jonathan, I just want to go back to that point about convenience. The thing is that a lot of people believe you have to sacrifice convenience for security, but that's not all the way true with zero trust. When you implement it well, you don't have to sacrifice any convenience. The user just has to relearn a couple of small things, like something like, oh, hey, when I open my laptop, it might take a second before I'm connected to the network. Or I have to authenticate first. I have to log in. I have to use my MFA token before I do anything. But that's not sacrificing convenience all the way. They're going to do that anyway when they're opening their Outlook, when they're going to Facebook, when they're going to Twitter. They'll have to do it anyway. So it's not that you'll have to inconvenience all of your users. You just have to teach them that some of these steps are coming a little bit sooner in the process than what they're used to. Instead of having it in the browser, it's already when they're opening their laptop.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for last minute jumping on here. I appreciate you, man. But you guys are a vendor. I mean, you're big in the community. You listen to the feedback, you implement stuff. If I'm correct, you guys just started signing BAs also now, right? Ninja, am I correct?
Yes, you are correct about that. Now, I have to remind you, I know just enough about security to be dangerous, mostly to Ninja. So if anyone has questions about that, I can direct them to other people. But yes, the short answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and you want a vendor that has somebody that has the answers, right? You don't have to be the one that has all the answers, but you definitely want to qualify and say we have somebody that's not afraid of the conversation. At the end of the day, if the answer you get is let me get back to you and then radio silence, you should use that time to find a new vendor. I don't care what it is. So I just wanted to put that out there. Jonathan, do you hear a lot of these questions about zero trust? Do you get your clients qualifying you guys, saying how do you implement security?
Yeah, I mean, we do get these questions, and just to give some more context, I'm with Ninja now, and before that, I was with endpoint security startup called Barkley, and so security is something that I'm constantly keeping up with. And zero trust, I've seen, obviously the past few years, it's become more and more of a term that people are throwing out there. And I was curious to come on here to ask, there's the idea that there's zero trust in terms of MSPs adopting it, and then going back to this question of selling the idea to customers. I'm kind of curious to get people's thoughts on how technical do you get with that? I mean, I think the general best practice is we shouldn't be getting that technical with clients, or for most of them anyway. But in terms of describing zero trust, are we showing examples? Are we relying strictly on analogies? I'm kind of curious to hear what are good practices there, because that's where it really comes with our own customers. It's more a matter of running into these same challenges of okay, we know that this is something we want to work towards, but how do we get our clients on board?
Yeah, and I'm curious, as we ask our MSPs on here, is that conversation different, whether it's a European MSP or an American MSP, or North American MSP, because Luis is in Canada. Kelvin, how's that conversation going? How technical, how deep dive are you getting in that?
It super depends on each client. We have clients that are like a local gym that has 5 employees, and there we just tell them, we're going to secure your network. We don't go in depth in exactly what we're going to do. We just tell them, hey, we're going to take care of security. these are some things you need to know, and we'll just explain the practical side to them. So, hey, when you open your laptop, you have to log in with MFA, all these kind of things. And then we have the bigger clients. We have a huge client that is specialized in healthcare data, but they're also a more technical company themselves. They have a team of, I think, 200 developers. So they're coming to us with these examples of, hey, we want to implement zero trust security, but we actually want to go a step further, and we want conditional access for everything, and also our internal applications. And they think about regular pen testing and all these kinds of extra steps above just the zero security model. I do have to say that in my experience, all of the European clients handle security a lot easier. They're easier to jump in to a more secure model as they are thinking about GDPR. There's huge fines if you don't disclose that you've had an information leak and all of these things. It's just a really big difference in the market, I guess, because there's a lot more law around security and being security aware.
Yeah, and that's kind of a big point too. You know, the EU kind of started the conversation for you, right? With GDPR. Now it's not even and that's why I love regulated clients so much. You're not the one saying you're doing this, you need to do this. You have this giant, this 900-pound gorilla on the client's back saying you're going to do this or you're going to get fined, right? Which is why I like HIPAA so much, which is like PCI, FINRA, FERPA, SOX, whatever. The goal is that there's some third party saying you have to do these things. It's not an option. Luis, Canada has their own version of GDPR, right? You have PIPEDA, which is somewhat similar. But let me ask you, how's that conversation? How does that go with your clients?
Yeah, so we have clients that are have governing bodies or are government agencies or things like this that are required to be in compliance with things like FIPA or FOIPA or PIPEDA. And so they are definitely more aware because there's been sort of this requirement placed in front of their technology to keep all data in Canada as an example, or to make sure that no data transit is outside of Canada. So even using a website host that is not in Canada is a no-no for situations like that. But the challenge, I think, is that we've been sort of poorly trained throughout the years, because you look at things like PCI or even HIPAA, where most people just need to self-assess and self-comply. There is no actual regulating body that says, this is, or standards or framework that's being provided. If you were to pull every MSP here that has a customer with point of sale terminals about who's actually separating those into their own VLANs or networks, you probably get a really low hit rate on that. And so we're not even doing a good job at actually following the existing frameworks. So yeah, the challenge is there's a big sort of shortcut taking culture around this. And so this is a lot of the conversation we try to take with clients is there is no alternative. This is the right way to do it. This is the thing that's going to support you best and keep you the best protected possible into the future. And I think when we can frame that conversation in the context of business risk and how that can affect them from a business outcome and productivity and uptime and business reputation in the city, I think it changes the conversation a bit. I learned maybe 5 years ago that the technical conversations with clients just go nowhere. They immediately tune out, and so it's been sort of a learning process all this time.
So, Peter, and I agree with you guys 100%. Peter, you're a vendor. You provide a security solution. You provide a security, I hate to even call it a solution. You provide a security answer to the question, right? How do we continue to work no matter where we are and can maintain the security? I've found in my life as a vendor, working with other MSPs, they're very technical. They're happy to have a technical conversation. Having a business conversation is much more difficult, right? And what Luis is saying, I apologize, Luis. When I speak in English, I say Luis. When I speak in Spanish, I say Luis. So I apologize. But when we have to teach them. I found as a vendor, we have to teach them how to have that conversation, how to get that message across. Are you experiencing that? Are MSPs asking you, how do I have the conversation? And what's your answer?
We're getting that. And actually, I like what Luis brought up, which is the challenge of discussing technology or security with your customer. We wouldn't go anywhere. It's the same thing with the MSPs. What they have to learn is, and the idea of if you're serving a PCI compliant customer, you're probably not segmenting stuff. MSPs should know that you can actually make money doing the right thing. That's the first thing they have to understand, because not doing it is actually not doing yourself and your customer a favor, because if they get breached or they get fined, they're going to look to you and say, you failed us. So MSPs have to understand that the reason why you came to this business in the first place is because you are a trusted expert to your customers. You're trying to shield them from all the complexity, boil it down to simple stuff that you're in this industry, you're required to have XYZ. My job is to do it for you. This is how much it's going to, this is what's going to be involved with, this is what's going to cost. Most customers will say yes, because if it's a compliant thing, they'll do it. The same way, the best way to handle security, in my opinion, at least one of the best ways, is to let your customers know that to the extent that NSA is getting hacked, any business can be hacked, and that your job is to make them a very hardened target. Your job is to make sure that it'll be very hard to breach them, and also that if anything ever happens, this is your fallback plan. And even though this is not part of the topic, but I should mention it that a good security checklist should include, obviously, cybersecurity insurance. It should include offsite backup in case everything else fails, right? Because zero trust doesn't guarantee that a customer won't get breached if you have an employee that willingly gives away the key to the kingdom. Because if that employee has already passed through all of the safeguards and all the checklist, and they invite someone in to come and breach the company, what can you really do? So as MSPs, when we talk to them, we tend to be bold in trying to show the expertise to the customers without all the complexity. Meaning that don't talk about all the segmenting, firewall, this, firewall, that. Just let them know you're making them a harder target to be attacked, and let them know that many small businesses are the ones that are mostly attacked every year, not the big ones. Even though we hear about the big ones because they're big enough to make the news, but the small guys don't make the news, they just go out of business. Okay?
Yeah.
So part of our job is to simplify the messaging, like Louis said, but do our job. Don't shy away because it's complex or they won't pay for it. That's what they're paying you for. Do it. So we educate our MSPs when we talk to them about this stuff.
Absolutely, and I think that's brilliant, and that's awesome, and that's what you should be expecting, guys. When you talk to your vendors, they should be giving you answers on not only their technology but how to have the conversations.
Yeah.
Because if they haven't answered those questions themselves, you got a whole other set of problems.
That is true.
So we do have another rock star. Luis is not our only rock star here. We have another rock star in the chat, Quentin Comer of Comer Technology Consultants. They do PSA and RMM consulting. He's putting stuff in here, which makes a whole lot of sense. One of the last things he said, though, was, what happens when a client says, no, I don't want to, right? We just had that on our compliance session. Before, we had a doctor that said they're not bound by HIPAA, right? Which is funny, and Quinn brought up, the problem with a lot of these agencies is they don't have enough bite either. There are a lot of bark, but not bite. HHS is absolutely auditing and smacking, and the PCI vendors, right? Visa, Amex, MasterCard, they're absolutely doing the smacking. There's no question. When they can claw back 6 months of your credit card proceeds to be safe, I've seen it happen. It absolutely does happen. But, you inevitably will get a client that says, look, it's not likely it's going to happen to me, right? Even though Peter's saying, the small businesses are getting hacked. This is absolutely happening. But you talk to 100 small businesses, they think it's not them, right? They think it's Target, Home Depot, whatever. So I know what Quentin thinks about how to handle and I did ask him to come on audio and video, by the way. He's having tech difficulties, so he's not going to be able to come on. But Kelvin, how do you address a client that says, that doesn't apply to me, I'm not interested?
We tell them bye. We simply leave them. It's as simple as that. And our MSP relationship are always based on mutual trust. We have to trust the client has to trust us. And if they're saying no to the security measures that we're suggesting, they're already saying no to us as an entire MSP. They're just not interested in having our type of environment, something that we want to support, something that we want to help them achieve success with. So at the moment that we're saying, like, hey, they don't think our security methods are a good fit for them, then our MSP isn't a good fit for them. And we've actually fired a couple of clients over wanting bad security, saying like, hey, just open all ports, just leave MFA off. And we said, okay, but this is the moment that we're removing our hands, and good luck finding a new MSP. And that is one of the only correct solutions, I think.
So I wanted to ask you, actually, I want to take real quick before I kick it over to Luis. You're in the middle of merging with another or purchasing another large MSP, right? Bringing them into your fold. You have this whole other set of clients that may or may not have been subscribed to your security practices. Are you anticipating having more of those conversations of saying you're going to do it our way, you're going to do it, or you're going to go?
We actually already did. Most of the clients that didn't apply to our model, we said goodbye to. The way we've split our company, or the way we've merged them with us, is that there was a small part that we left behind, and we left those clients with them.
I see serious questions in the chat, such as, Kelvin, in your background, is that a picture of a memory chip? I believe it's a flugelhorn. What is that?
Yes, it is a picture of a memory chip, and it has a quote under it saying 640K ought to be enough for anybody.
Wow. And
right.
I have a $200 Amazon gift card for the first person that says who actually said that, because that is a real quote. 640K should be enough for anybody.
It sounds like
Luis,
Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Luis,
Hey,
talk
Ray.
to me. Yes, sir.
I wanted to add something to what Kelvin just said. This is all part of vendor talking to MSPs and whatnot. There are some MSPs on this call who cannot afford to fire customers if they say they don't want the security recommendation they're given. Maybe one alternative for those MSPs that are not in a position to let customers go is to make them sign a waiver, meaning that if you advise them they have to do XYZ and they say no, they wouldn't do it, maybe one way you can cover yourself business-wise to say, well, draw up more of a, I've recommended this, you've declined this, please sign over here. I think even the process of having that conversation in a very cordial way with the customer might get him to think twice and say, you know what, if this guy is going to go as far as making me sign a waiver to protect himself, maybe I should listen to him. So that could be another way to keep your customers and get them to comply with you. Obviously, if they won't sign, then you have a different problems. That means, if they get breached, they may want to hold you responsible. So that could be a way out of that. And I'd like to hear what people think about that, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. We will ask Luis what you think about that. First, Michael McCool in the chat was the first to say Bill Gates, and the answer is actually not Bill Gates. He said many years later, he said a lot of stupid things, but not that. It's like one of my favorite not Einstein quotes. But Michael did immediately follow up with not Bill Gates. So we'll go ahead and award him the Amazon gift card. Do me a favor. The gift card is going to be held by Peter and his team over in the TrueGrid booth. So see him after the session. He'll get your information. He'll forward it over to you. Luis, what's your response, man?
Ask the question in a different way.
Sorry, I talk a lot, so we may have missed it. Peter, you want to concisely state the question?
Right. I was responding to Kevin's. Kevin's probably fortunate to be one of those MSPs, especially in Europe, where most likely the customers out there, they get security already. So I'm suspecting that he probably hopefully doesn't have to fire too many customers who are not willing to listen to him. But in the US, as Luis, when we talked last week, you kind of brought up the fact that this isn't always the case, right? You have customers that don't want to spend money on anything. So if an MSP or a break-fix IT service provider trying to become an MSP and trying to pitch security in a very cordial way to your customer, and they just don't want any part of it, and you think if they don't listen to you and they get breached, you might be held responsible. I was suggesting, Luis, that one of the ways to kind of close that loop might be to kind of draw up your recommendation and then decline and have them to sign that they're declining your recommendation. So Ray was asking, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of sit with Kelvin on this particular opinion, and that if we can't get sort of the trust buy-in from an early stage of the relationship, I don't think a waiver of liability is going to fix that in the long term. And I think ultimately there needs to be sort of that unspoken level of trust where the customer just knows that we are keeping their best interests at heart at every step of the way. And if they're questioning some of those decisions, I think this is something that comes with experience, by the way. You may not recognize those signs or signals early on in the relationship with some customers. And obviously, as you're getting started too, there's always the fight or famine situation where you either have customers or you just need any business you can take. And so you're gonna probably give up some of your principles to be able to grow the business initially. But there needs to be a plan to shift those away. And so there's so many business level things that factor into being able to deploy a proper security strategy. It's not just about being able to get access to the right vendors. But I would say today, maybe not 8 years ago, 10 years ago, but today I would probably say no to that customer and just let them free up their future, as somebody I know used to say.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm not a fan of the waiver.
Okay.
I've spoken 1,000 times about the success in our MSP, even the success in our voice company. We pick and choose our clients. Finding the right type of client, finding the client's going to understand the value proposition, and engaging in the relationship. That's going to net you a much more positive and profitable relationship overall than trying to fit everybody into the same hole. It just doesn't work. Waivers, even when you have them sign a waiver, you have to defend the waiver should you get audited or should something happen out of it. So I believe it's a dangerous proposition. Kelvin, I'll let you respond to the same if you want to.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. I mean, the waiver is, it's just a piece of paper and it doesn't say anything. I think Kent just put it best in the chat. At the end of the day, if you're an MSP, well, I just lost it. It was just in the chat a second ago. But at the end of the day, when you're supplying MSP services, the waiver is going to cost you more. It's going to cost you more because you're going to have to give more attention to that specific client. You're going to have to have more discussions with the client about security in its entirety. You're going to have to find different avenues of securing them. It's not worth it. It's not worth the time.
Let me tell you what I like about this, if I may, very quickly. I like the fact that the MSPs are speaking up and encouraging other up-and-coming MSPs on how to draw a hard line. And I think, like Louis said, maybe that comes with maturity, because you had said maybe 10 years ago, you probably would be thinking about that because you don't want to lose a customer. We got confronted with the same thing. We had a law firm that wanted to adopt our product, and they said we had to disable the MFA feature in our product. We promptly said no. We just weren't going to do it because we created a product to be known as a product you could use without being compromised from a security standpoint. So we had to say no. So I kind of appreciate that feedback. I think for the up-and-coming MSPs on the call, maybe they learn something. So maybe the best way is to choose your client and decide that if this customer is not going to listen to your advice, maybe you shouldn't have them. So thank you for that comment.
I like that. And that's what we're here for, open discussion, learning different points of view, and hopefully the idea is not, I don't expect anyone to say, I'm going to do it exactly your way. I'm going to change my way of doing things. I expect you to get a little bit of here and there and adopt it what makes sense for you as a company.
Hey, Ray, I had something just a question for you guys. So, waivers, no. What about plans? When we're talking about hard lines, do you guys have experiences with working with clients who are maybe they can't get from A to Z right off the bat, but you're working with them to establish a plan? Here's the roadmap for us. You can't afford everything all at once, but we're going to work toward it. Or are you at the point now where you're just taking on clients that can't afford to get all the way where you need them to be from day one?
That's a good point. I mean, there's a challenge, right? And for the MSPs, I think I have an easy answer to this, but the challenge is, if you were charging enough to cover your existing tool costs and that tool set increased, if you're that MSP that includes everything, you go back to the client, you renegotiate, right? Do you say, I'm going to charge you more for this extra thing? Say if we're providing TrueGrid, for example, right? Which is actually really cheap for what it is, which is pretty amazing. But, maybe you're charging so little that really affects you. How do you have that conversation? If the client says, no, we can't, what do you do? I imagine this has come up once in a while. Kelvin, I know your type is more like I am, right? Charge a high number so you can include what you need to. That's always been my thing, right?
Exactly.
There's not a whole lot I can't say yes to. Louis, I don't think we've ever discussed pricing. Louis, what's your model here?
Yeah, our model is definitely all inclusive, but I feel like there is sort of, Quinton is commenting that you either handle it right before they even become a client, sort of onboarding or remediation project is what we call it. And we do that many times. Other times, if there's a lot of work to be done, sometimes it's not reasonable cost-wise to do it all at once. And so this is where, and this term is great, the QBR, everybody knows the QBR, but my friend Peter Melby from Greystone Technology in Denver, he actually participated in the Shark Tank, the MSP Shark Tank that Continuum did a few years ago. And one of the things that he came up with that he's shared actually quite a bit publicly, and I'll see if I can find it. But it's essentially like think of it like a Gartner Magic Quadrant, but of security initiatives. And so the idea here is that the sooner you start having conversations with your customer about the security steps that need to be taken, the sooner you get a chance to start implementing them. It's no different than your onboarding checklist. The sooner you get started tackling that list, the sooner you'll be able to get through it. But the idea behind the quadrant is to be able to grade security initiatives by cost and by complexity, and be able to do obviously the most impactful and least expensive solutions first, but giving the client some kind of opportunity to participate in the process. Because one of the challenges, and a lot of people take this for granted, but when clients are just being told they need to do this, sometimes they push back for no other reason than I don't like being told that we have to do this or that we have to spend it, and I don't understand why. And so I think this is a really interesting process or way of getting the client involved in deciding what is important to them from a risk perspective and where can they spend money. And that way you can keep the process moving as opposed to just let it sit there stale thinking, oh, they're not going to do everything at once, I can't take this client on. So I think it's definitely, it helps the MSP, they bring on new business, they can help the customer mature through that process. It doesn't necessarily require a hard line all the time, as long as there's a good intention to move forward with the recommendations. And again, the experience will tell you when the customer is just trying to blow smoke and just say, oh yeah, we'll do whatever you think, but ultimately are just going to say no to those things. And so that's the part where you need to put your spidey senses on and figure out where the customer is going to go.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you can be reasonable about this, right? It doesn't have to be, you're not going to do what I want, we're cutting you off today. You don't have enough money, we're cutting you off today. There's plenty of clients I took on that weren't able to be compliant in the beginning, but we had that discussion at onboarding, we had that discussion at contract negotiation time, and we said, we're going to take the next 12 months so we can do it reasonably within cost and scope. So we knew there was a roadmap to get there.
And by the way,
for that, by the way, so.
on that comment, Ray, that is like the number one thing that helps you drive longer term contracts, is being able to articulate that you need to have at least 1 year to actually create an impactful change or meaningful change in the business. Because a lot of the small business customers think they're just going to hire a new MSP and that things are going to be magically better the next day. And they don't realize that you need some time to actually deploy things and up level their standardization across the board. So it's a key actually conversation topic for long.
Absolutely. And the contents for this stuff, QBRs, Lifecycle Insights, they're a sponsor here. Go visit them. Alex and Marnie are here. Go talk to them. They have answers for this stuff to make it easy too, right? Easy solutions for real problems. So we're at 2:28. We have exactly 2 minutes. So I want to give you 30 seconds for last comments. Anything you want to say? We'll start with Kelvin. Kelvin?
I think what I'd like to say is don't be scared of security hygiene as an MSP. I've already given a session about it together with Ninja and now here. Don't be worried about security, pushing security onto your clients. It's important for your own state of mind, not just for the clients. You want to be completely rested at home, relaxed, knowing that your clients are not getting ransomware all over. So I guess that's my biggest takeaway. Yeah, exactly.
As much as you can be rested.
Exactly.
Luis, real quick, 30 seconds. Anything you want to say?
Dog food it. Definitely dive right in, do it yourself, break all the things, and just make sure you understand sort of how you're going to impact the user productivity and the user environments, because you can make your process better as a result.
Dog food it, absolutely. Peter, this is your session, sir. You get the final words. Anything you want to share with us?
Well, thank you. I echo what Kelvin and Luis just said to close. And I encourage all of you to charge for it too. Charge for your services. That's why they hire us as an expert. And stop by at our booth to get the remote work checklist that we actually created for you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
For checklist, he has the information. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you. 2:30, 2:45, Datagate is going to be doing a live demo, seeing how easy VoIP billing can be with your PSA. Make sure you hit all the booths. Michael, you have a $200 gift card. Go talk to Peter, Jennifer. Go talk to the staff over at TrueGrid booth. They have it ready for you. Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you on the next session. Have a good one.